Hello and welcome to this episode of Diner Talks with James. That's me. I'm James. Friends, I hope you are doing well today. We're going to let some people siphon their way in here into the feed before we officially get jumping in, but we got some viewers, which I'm super excited about. As always, if you could let me know where you are from, that would be incredible. Where are you calling in from? Also, if you can hear me okay, you never know with tech issues, do me a favor and just smash that thumbs up button if you can hear me. Okay, that would just be super appreciate that, just so I know that it's coming in clear. But tell me where you're calling in from or where you're tuning in from, whatever this version of technology is. But I am super excited. What's going on? Alameda. I see you, Brittany. I see you. Oaktown, most certainly in the building. For sure. Love it. Appreciate you, Scott. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. Strong Island, baby. Let's go. We out here. We're not allowed to call it Strong Island. That's what people in Nassau call it. So, friends, welcome to this episode of Diner Talks with James. We have a great episode coming at you with my boy Steve Whitby, who is going to be joining us. So feel free to cue that theme music. Bow, 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 bow. All right, we're still working on it, y'all. The work in progress. It's coming up, though. So let us jump right into our top three. Remember, as always, if you are interested in being a part of this episode, if you have some questions, you can feel free to let me know what you wanted me to talk about in the top three. Put those suggestions. You can put them in the chat. I'll talk about them there, or we can talk about them at another point. If you want to find me on slide into these DMs, you're trying to hit me with that text, boo, you up? Yeah, I'm up. Anyway, feel free to let me know what you want next week's top three to be about. So, first off, Top three. This one's coming from Dan Fail. Dan Fail in the house. Jump for joy. He asked me what my top three favorite podcasts are. Fun fact, Diner Talks with James is going to be a podcast in the future. That's called The Teaser. We'll let you know more about that in the upcoming weeks. I'm really excited about that, though. So, Top three favorite podcasts. First out, my boy Antonio Neves has a podcast called The Best Thing, and I think it's incredible. He's one of the best interviewers that I know, one of the best question askers that I know. It's called The Best Thing. It is exceptional. He interviews some really high-profile people who are doing some awesome stuff. I just love his style as well. It's a really cool show. It's the best thing that happened to you that's not the day your kids were born. That's not the day you got married. That's not like some of those quintessential obvious best days. It's got to be the next best thing. So that podcast is called The Best Thing. It's really good. Check it out. Next thing is by my man, Mike Rowe. Mike Rowe has one of the sexiest voices in modern times. Maybe you know him from Deadliest Catch or Dirtiest Jobs. He has a podcast called That's the Way I Heard It, and it is awesome. It is the podcast for the curious mind with a short attention span. Essentially what it is it's 11 minutes long, and he tells an entire story, and then he tells you who the lead character of that story was, right? And that was none other than John Bon Jovi. That was none other than Michelle Obama, King Lear. That was whoever. It's a really cool podcast. And lastly, Ear Hustle is my favorite podcast of all time. It's done by the prisoners of San Quentin out in California, and it is an exceptional podcast that is a really powerful window into prison life and also just after incarceration life as well. It's really done really well, and I proudly support that. That's the first top three. What's your favorite podcast? Let me know, friends. Let me know what your favorite podcast is. I'd love to hear it. Next, top cities. This one, my boy Brendan asked me top cities that I've been to abroad. First off, Siena in Italy. Siena in Italy is beautiful. It is magical. My wife and I had a really incredible time there. I'll tell you about it when it's more appropriate to do so. Not in public, but we had a really special time there, and it was awesome. Next, Vancouver. The Couve is incredible. It's got one of the best aquariums I've been to. Just cool vibes, and they do really cool stuff for their residents, and I really love Vancouver a lot. Last but not least is Vienna, with a V. Vienna's probably the most beautiful city I've ever been to in my life. And also, if you're going to serve me non-stop bratwursts, I'm probably going to love you. So shout out to that. Have you ever been to any of those cities? And have you ever been to Siena? Have you been to Vancouver? Have you been to Vienna? Any of those places? So those are my top 3 cities that I've been to. Another friend asked me what top 3 travel destinations. I would probably put Iceland on top of all of that. So yeah, that's what I would say. Although we all know the best city in the world is New York City. You're welcome. Thank you. Next, my dad chimed in. Listen, whenever my family chimes in, you know it's going to be interesting. My dad asked me, he said, James, what are the top 3 funny things that have happened to you? Y'all, I could probably do a number of these top 3 lists. I don't even know if these are the top 3. These are just more like the first 3 that I thought of. So here we go. The first 3 things that I thought of when my dad asked me, what are some funny things that happened to you? First off, I remember I was an RA in college. It was about halfway through the spring semester, and one of the residents needed to leave. For whatever reason, she had to transfer, whether it was financial, grades, whoever. I don't even really know what was going on, but it was late at night, and we were hanging out in the lounge. The lounge, right as you come up to the 3rd floor of the building I was on, it was right as you walk out, so it was an amazing social spot, and it was awesome. Tons of couches. We'd hang out there every single night. I loved it, and I would notoriously fall asleep at some point in time. So this night was no different. So I fell asleep. And apparently this young woman came out and started to tell everybody, listen, I'm really sad to be leaving. I love the community. I just loved it here. Like, I don't even want to leave yet, but I just need to support my family. And it's the right thing to do. And but it just kills me because I love it here and I'm sad. And hopefully I can come back next fall, but I just don't know if it's in the cards. And I, at some point, as I mentioned, was asleep, and then at some point just woke up during the middle of her monologue and just said in a half-sleepy state, "Take it easy." And then I fell back asleep. That's role modeling behavior at its finest right there. Next, number two, I was once, a fun fact about me, I'm a bit of an audiophile, so I care about speakers, I care about headphones, I care about microphones, all that kind of stuff. I want to try to get top-notch stuff in all those places, and car audio is where I spent most of the money that I ever made before the age of 22. I don't have a drinking, I never drank in college, I never really partied, I would go to parties, but I wouldn't be like getting hammered and stuff like that. Where I spent all of my money was on car audio. So I have a lot to show for it right now. Anyway, so I was installing some new speakers, some 3-ways in my door of my car at the time, an 1987 Buick Grand National. And I was installing the speakers in the car door. And so it was there. It was a hot day, and I was figuring out. I was like, hang on a second. I was like, Brian, I told my buddy Brian, who was helping me, I said, Brian, I was like, I can't figure it out. There's this glass in the door. Why is there glass in the door? Like, that's the dumbest place. Like, I guess it's like protected down here because you can't like break it. But like, how am I supposed to install this speaker with the damn glass in the door? And he said, James, your window's down. Cool. Anyway, third thing, last story that I'll share you is that I lost a fight with an oyster. Let me rewind. I lost a fight with an oyster. I was a member of the free diving club. Here's what free diving is. It's scuba diving, but you hold your breath. And so you learn how to hold your breath for a long time. It's really ideal for things like spear fishing. And also you just disturb nature a little bit less. It's just a really cool way to learn how to hold your breath and get to see nature in a less disturbing way. So I was a member of that club in college. And so one night we all decided to do a nighttime free dive. So I had my flashlights out. Some people were out there trying to spearfish for rockfish and grouper and stuff like that and bass. And I was just there because it was something to do. And I was just excited. And I'm a marine biology nerd. So we're there. I'm diving, having a good time. I'm diving deeper than I've ever gone before. I'm going like 40 feet below the surface and like getting to stay down there. It was really cool. And then right at the last minute, everybody's like, all right, let's get out of here. It's time to go. Let's wrap it up. I was like, cool. And then a friend of mine was like, Hey, I'm really sorry. I just kicked my goggles off the dock. Can you do me a favor? Can you dive down and see if you can see them? Sure, no problem. Now, I had been diving away from the dock the entire night and hadn't really thought about it. So instead, I was like, "Ooh, I can help. Let me dive down." Took 3 big gulps of air, drove down, and then I didn't think about the way water works. Because the water on the top is moving one way, the water at the bottom is moving the other way, so the current carried me under the dock. And when you're down there and you run out of air, it's time to come up. So you shoot up as fast as you can. You don't have to worry about things like the bends with scuba diving because you don't have any compressed air in your lungs. Instead, you just shoot up, and I smacked right under the bottom of the dock. It's honestly a miracle that I didn't die. I could have easily broke my neck. But I smacked, it hurt, and I was like, oh shit, I'm under the dock. And I quick tried to dive to the side, and I was able to come up. And then I had to play it off nonchalant. I was like, yo, bro, listen, I was down there, couldn't find your goggles. I'm really sorry. And he's like, yo, dude, you're bleeding. I was like, what are you talking about? And then I removed my mask, and my whole left eye floods with blood. And I just had all this bleeding. I wound up having to get 12 or 15 stitches right above my eye from where this oyster totally kicked my ass. My roommates decided it would be funny, so they duct tape an oyster to my door for the rest of the year. My friends, that is tonight's Top 3. You're welcome for it. Again, if you want to chime in next week, let me know. Let us get to the episode. Aaron, you may have been there, brother. You may have been there. I'm not sure. So let's jump into this episode. Tonight, we have an incredible man coming to the stage. This is my man, Steve Whitby. He is also a speaker, but he's one of the best storytellers that I know. He's an exceptional human being. He's such a good human being that Tina and I asked him to officiate our wedding because that's how special we believe he is and how dynamic of a man that he is and just how much we love his character. And I'm excited because he's got some cool stories to tell and he's got some really interesting experiences. Let's bring him on right now. Do me a favor. Go ahead and smash that heart button as I'm bringing in the man, Steve Whitby. What up, brother?
Hey. How you doing, James?
I'm good. How are you doing, man?
Not bad. It's a Wednesday night. And tropical storm just rolled through Charlotte, so rain just stopped. I'm good with it.
Like an actual tropical storm?
Yeah, Bertha. You not up on the news? You're like, what are you doing?
Bertha.
Yeah,
no. I'm sorry. Here in Minneapolis,
you know nothing about it.
Well, I knew there was a tropical storm. I wasn't paying attention. Here in Minneapolis, unfortunately, we had the wrongful killing of George Floyd, so I was out at the protests, so I'm sorry, my mind's gotten wrapped up there. But any wind damage or anything on your home?
No, it's just rain. It was literally a tropical storm by 1 mile per hour. So not really. It's an imposter, if anything. So just gave us a little bit of rain.
Hey, look, Ma, I made it. There you go.
Yeah. I got a name.
That's the thing, right? Like, if you're still, obviously the goal is to be a starter in the professional sports league, but if you're riding the bench, you still have made it further than 99% of the people who thought, like, I could pick up a football.
Yep. I'd love to be the 25th man on the roster for any major league team, even if it's only for one day of the season. I'm in for that. No problem.
Yeah, exactly. My nephew actually told me, he said, Uncle James, you know what I want to be? He's like, I want to be a punter. And I said, why do you want to be a punter? I was like, you could be anything. And my nephew he's 9 years old, right? 9 years old. And he says, well, I want to be the punter because I can come in and do what I got to do and then never get hit and still make a lot of money. I was like, yo, this guy's got it figured out.
Yeah, I don't know that I could take the pressure of a punter job, but he's like, everyone's looking at you. You got one job. You're not even a kicker that has to do multiple kinds of kicking in a game. Yeah, no. You got one kind of kicking, and that's it.
That's it. Yep. Yeah, for sure. I'm terrible at punting, and that's a fact that you didn't need to know about me. So
I'm pretty much terrible at sportsing. So I watch him, but not a good thing for me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Whitby, I'm glad that your family is safe from the just about a tropical storm, Bertha. Down in North Carolina, I know y'all get a bunch of those storms, so this was probably not much to scoff at. But yeah. But Whitby, here's what I want to dive into, brother. Here's what I want to dive in because I've known you for a number of years now, actually, almost 10 years, which is really special. We got brought in to a speaking agency the same year. And so Here's what I want to talk to you about is that you're one of the biggest dog lovers I know. You're somebody who, like, you just love, like, whenever you see a dog, you were petting the dog, you're like, you just love dogs, but you don't have any dogs yourself, but you're not allergic. What's going, Whitby, why don't you have any dogs?
So this is a more complicated story than you think it is, James, because there's a layer inside this that you have not yet unpacked with me. And so this is going to be a fun little surprise for you anyway. But so I've been married to my wife for 15 years, and Tammy is incredibly tolerant, incredibly intelligent woman.
Shout out to Tammy.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I don't know, long about a year and a half into being married to her, a year into being married, we were having one of those conversations you have when you're relatively newlywed. We were in our 30s already. And so I don't know how we got to this sort of agreement, but we were sitting on the edge of the bed in the first house that we lived in. And we were having this conversation, which was, this is a year where we should do something big. We've gotten over the hump of the first year kind of thing. So this year we should, get a dog or have a baby. Mm-hmm. And I asked Tammy, well, do you want to have a baby or do you want to get a dog? And 3 years in a row, she chose baby. So in the span of about 2.5 years, we had 3 children. She did the lion's share of the work, but I'll use we anyway. But we had 3 children in 3 years, 3 girls. And so my first 2, Talia and Ren, are less than a year apart. They're Irish twins. Sure, yeah. And then my third, Elliot, was born and was already very alert before Talia ever turned 3. That's how close together they were. Like Talia and Ren are so close together that for Ren, who's my second, for her first birthday, Ren actually got to attend her older sister's first birthday. That's not that common. Like, that's not a thing you get to do very often. Like, most of the time you're maybe hanging out in the womb at best, but no, she was out and she had her eyes open and everything to watch Talia eat the ladybug cake that Tammy made for her. So yeah, 3 kids in 3 years. But here's the rub, James.
Okay.
And I will resist calling anybody in here right now, but there is a beagle in my house now.
Hold up.
There's a beagle in my house. For now exactly almost 1 year, we have had this beautiful beagle foxhound mix who is as ornery as any hound could possibly be. But long about last May, as my family was going through some big changes, Tammy looks at me on a Saturday afternoon. We were walking past this animal rescue thing that's going on. And she looks at me and she's like, maybe we should get a dog. And I'm like, is there more to this conversation than I'm thinking here? Because every other conversation we've had about maybe we should have a dog has resulted in a daughter, which I win. That's wonderful. That's amazing. But I'm like, I am not prepared. There is a lot of change going on in my life right now. Maybe we shouldn't be talking about whether we get a dog or not. But by the end of the day, we had a dog. And so now we've got a beautiful little floppy beagle named Nellie in the house. So I'm still completely outnumbered, all women in the house, but except for me. But yeah. So
the dog's name is Nellie?
The dog's name is Nellie. Yes.
Great name. So first off, that speaks to how good of a friend I am that I didn't know you had a dog for a year. So that's I
don't travel with her or anything. So
yeah, that's fair. And you love to talk about yourself. That's why I had to force you to do this show. It's basically why you're on here, is just to make you uncomfortable for an hour and we all get to watch.
It's just watching me turn various shades of red as I attempt to turn the conversation to you.
Perfect. Well, unfortunately, your dad's watching, and he told me to tell you that you should behave yourself.
Ignore the 80-year-old man around the corner. Yes, always a good idea.
But also that Mom loves your shirt. So far, your dad is my favorite person that's ever watched this show.
Well, about the shirt, what's funny is I sat down and then I realized I looked at Facebook on the ad for this and I realized this is the shirt that I'm actually wearing in the headshot that you have up. So apparently I didn't think you could recognize me in a crowd or something. And so I had to wear the same shirt so you can make sure to find me. Like, oh, okay, it's you. You're wearing the same shirt.
Okay,
so
perfect. Yeah. Well, it's a great looking shirt.
Well, this has started well. This has started brilliantly. So
yeah, I agree. I mean, I appreciate you for staying on brand. I mean, that's it. I had somebody call me out today on social media because I posted a video, and I was wearing the same shirt that I did a virtual speech for her school or her conference at, and she was like, "You must really like that shirt." I was like, "These are like 3 weeks apart. Can a man wear?"
She was paying attention. That's all you got to be. That she was paying attention.
Yeah, that's real. Speaking of paying attention, Whitby, here's one thing that you mentioned earlier is that you now are still, after the addition of Nellie, you are still the only man in the household. You are the father to 3 incredible daughters who I've had the opportunity to watch do cartwheels down the street on our way to get ice cream. And,
yes.
They randomly were like, "Can we do cartwheels all the way there?" And I was like, "If you can, sure." And they did. So,
and they were using "we" in a way that they really probably did actually intend for you to participate.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, no, I put the no in cartwheels. So
that'll work.
But I'm curious. We are in such an important time in history for men. A really important time for history in men where we've been put under a microscope because we were comfortable for too long, and that's understandable. But I'm curious to hear for you I'm not entirely sure exactly how to ask this question, so give me a shot here. But what are the pressures that you feel as a man, and I should say a very conscious man as well, dare I say woke. I'm very fancy. But as a conscious man raising daughters today, how has that been? How, like, when Elliot came around, your youngest, were you like, another one? Cool, got this. Or like how has that experience been for you as a man raising 3 women today?
Well, I'll take a couple of attacks at that. First of all, you bring up something really interesting, which there's a bias involved in that I didn't realize was as strong as it was until it happened to me directly. And that's after you have 2 daughters in a year, people ask you a lot of questions. I mean, if you have any children, like 2 children in a year, and they're not coming out at the same time, people ask a lot of questions about your sanity and mental health and all this kind of thing. But when they were both girls, there's a logical next question that I'm betting you could ask me right now with no prompting whatsoever. What's the immediate question that comes when Tammy gets pregnant with our 3rd child? Do you want it to be a boy?
Do you want it to be a boy? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, are you excited? Are you hoping this is going to be a boy? Whatever. Because with all 3 of my children, we did not find out what their sex was going to be before they were born. Because, I mean, we figured we're going to find out like at some point. So, an extra couple of months wasn't going to make a huge difference kind of thing. So we didn't find out ahead of time. We waited until they were born, had our list of girls' names, had our list of boys' names. Some were sort of crossed over a little bit, that kind of thing. But with Elliot, the questions were pretty consistently like, oh, I bet you're really hoping for a boy because you've got, 2 girls. I'm a massive baseball fan. Like, do you want someone you can play sports with? And I'm just like, first of all, heck with you. But I had this moment where I realized, no, actually, I'm not hoping for a boy. I don't know if I speak boy at this point. I speak girl relatively well in the infant stage. Like, I don't know if I know how to deal with the hardware at this point of an infant boy and, like raising a boy at this point. And there was some intimidation with that of like, we're doing this okay with 2. Do I want to change the script that much? But I was amazed that there was that level of expectation that everyone just assumed as a dad that I needed to have a son. And so hearing that question so consistently, I think made me from the very beginning hope that it was a girl, because I had enjoyed so much already being girl dad to Talia and Ren. And granted, it was still new at that point, and I was still barely sleeping at all. but I was more than ecstatic when my third child was a girl too, because it gave me the opportunity to raise three girls that will someday become women in a pretty consistent way. I don't have to, like, I respect people that can parent both genders, in that they can flip that switch to some degree, because there are differences in needs in the way that you raise them and questions that you get asked and things that you have to teach and all that. And so I love the consistency of it all being girls, but I have learned the depth and richness of, they are three girls that can be confused for either twins or triplets sometimes. Because I mean, like, we're white Anglo-Saxon, blonde, I mean, there's a lot of similarities between them. When the two oldest were really young, they looked like twins and all that. They can be confused as if they're a unit, but they couldn't be more different from each other. And so learning the depth of differences between them, I think, has been the key to trying to parent them. I can't say that I'm successful yet, but I think embracing just how different they are from each other, even though they're all three little blonde-haired girls, I think is at the core of it right now. I mean, you've met all three of them. They are confusingly different from each other. Yeah. Talia is a gifted musician and singer and just into everything that is artistically natured. Ren next is like the two-time state champion gymnast, but also the goofiest thing that ever walked on 2 feet, and Elliot is like a cuddle machine factory that sort of combines the artistic bent of Talia and also does gymnastics too at a very similar level to Ren. And yeah, seeing the depth of differences, I think, is going to be part of the key of parenting them further beyond the fact that they're in middle school.
That's the beauty of Elliot, though, is that, I mean, she has the glory of being the baby of the family. And, we babies of the family are often exceptional mixes of the ones who came before us. So if I do say so myself, of course. But you're right. You're right, Steve. They are completely different, but they do, at first glance, look like they come as a mob, right? Like, here we come.
Oh yeah,
the blonde mob squad, cartwheeling their way over to me, and so yeah. It's incredible to get to learn their differences. And I want to, as I promised you I would do, anytime you make fun of yourself, I'm going to call you out. And so, I'm not successful at it yet. I think the interesting thing is how you define success, because you have three beautiful, brilliant children who love the hell out of their parents and are doing well in school and are pursuing their passions. I mean, if that's not what success looks like at this point of parenthood, I don't know what metrics you're using, but you can feel free to beat up yourself on somebody else's show. I'll
take it for now, but most of that I will attribute to my wife. You've met her and you know how significantly better she is than I am. So we'll go with that for right now.
Tammy is an exceptional human being. My brother has twin girls, and true twins too, not Irish twins. And the question that he gets asked most of the time is if he's gotten the shotgun yet. This is interesting because as a men, and particularly this, you and I do a lot of work with men around the country. And so we see the greatness that men can have, but we also see men at their group thinkiest, right? At their, pack mentality, at their, well, like, this is what I got to do at the moment where, I like to talk about why do men choose cool over great. We see men at all points of that spectrum. For you, as you yourself know who you were as a man and as a boy, how has that influenced the way that you talk to your daughters?
Oh, that's so hard.
It helps that you've always been a pretty decent man, but we've all slipped.
Yeah, I think getting insight into how people operate in groups versus how people operate individually is so rich in the question that you're asking here, because I know I have lived a different life in groups of men than I have been individually, both for the better and for the worse. And You have always chided me, as you have seen me speak over time, that I love telling stories. I love telling rich stories. There's a talk that I used to do. It was 50 minutes long, and it was one story for 48 minutes and 2 minutes of close. That was it.
Thank you.
But in all of the stories that I tell, very few of them have me or my life as a character in it.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of this self-deprecating nature that I have, that it's tough to tell a story when you don't think it's necessarily as good as the other stories that I can tell.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that I routinely include in almost any environment that I work with men particularly in is I tell a story of essentially the worst animated movie that's ever been created. And I'll
are
save
you talking about Rango?
Yeah, I'll save you the details. But
Go ahead,
if for those of you,
tell the story. Tell the story.
We won't go into all of it. But I will say that if any of you have not seen Rango, you can just thank the Lord that you have not wasted those 2 hours and 4 minutes. But if you haven't, let me bring you up to speed. I can give you the plot real quick. So the plot of the movie of Rango is there's a lizard who wears a cowboy hat in the desert. It's a plot. That's it. Sorry. Wait. Big plot point. It's dusty.
Oh, no.
It gets really dusty. So that's basically the film. That's Rango. And I was not impressed. My girls made me watch it. Secretly, I think that my wife bought it because Johnny Depp is the voice of Rango. And I'm like, you don't even see him. She's like, I don't have to. Like, okay. But anyway, we watched Rango, and like 2 hours into the movie, it's almost over. And it was, I didn't get it. I didn't get the movie. It sounded like the Pirates of the Caribbean walking through the desert, because it's Johnny Depp as a lizard wearing a cowboy hat, walking through. I don't know what he's doing or whatever. But the last thing he says in the film, like literally after 2 hours of me completely being mesmerized at how this got made, he turns to the camera, and the last thing he says, he looks straight at you, and he says, "No man can escape his own story." And then he turns and he walks away. I'm like, oh, how did you not start the movie with that? Like that right there is a good line. Start there and go somewhere, because that is a fantastic line. But it made me realize like the value of the individual story instead of the collective story, because you can feel invested in it. You can feel trapped in it. You can feel like you're living it. Like you can feel like you're being pulled along by it, but it's individual. And so when I talk with men, when I talk with women also, but when I talk with men in a group, I talk about the power of the individual story as opposed to the collective story, because when I work with men in fraternities, they get referred to as a group all the time, when in reality, they're not a group. They are a collected bunch of individuals, and they are individual stories being lived out. And so when we think of ourselves and understand the power of ourselves as individuals instead of just one cog in a collective or one cog in a chapter, we control our actions a lot more intelligently. But also in that same talk, I get into that story by showing a picture of my 3 daughters. And I mean, they, at the time of the picture, they're 10 years old, so they're cute little kids, just blonde puffs of joy with Panthers jerseys on. But I say I collectively refer to them as my daughters all the time, but they're not my daughters. They are Talia, they are Ren, and they are Elliot. They are 3 specific individual young girls who will be young women in chapters near you someday, and they are individual. And you will never serve them well. You will never understand them while you think of them as a collective, as a group, as a something, instead of as Talia, as Ren, as Elliot, as specific people. And I think that's, when I think of that men collective or raising as a dad, I've got to think of raising them as me, which is deeply flawed and has made terrible choices in my life, but hopefully is showing them individuals around them that are making good choices that are worth emulating.
Yeah. And that's so hard to do, because we hold ourselves we hold ourselves to impossible standards, and we know that. And I don't know what the impossible standards are that you hold yourself to, or to those of you listening, what are the impossible standards that you hold yourself to that you can never reach, and therefore you can never give yourself hope. And I am only as good as that time where I hurt somebody, as that time where I let somebody down, as the time where I embarrassed my parents, as the time where, like, I poked my mom in the eye in 3rd grade, and I think about that story to this day and will routinely still apologize to her about it. And like, it was completely unintentional. I mean, I was being extra, not me, but I was being extra in the moment. I didn't need to be like, and this is my mom, right? And like, I didn't need to do that, but obviously I wasn't gunning for her eyeball. I didn't have any resentment at that point in my life for her cornea. But still, like, I'm that person who, like, embarrassed his mother and hurt his mother in front of an entire room of people, right? And like, those kind of stories, like, they haunt you. And I haven't been shy about the divorce that I went through, and like the stories around that, and how that's something that I thought that I need to overcome, and the times where I hurt somebody or said something stupid or didn't know any better because of my privilege and said something that was off-putting to someone who grew up differently than I did, who looked differently than I did, who thinks differently than I did. At the time, I didn't know, and so it's like, it's one of the reasons why I never worked with men, because it was like, why the hell would you go and talk to men? You've done X, Y, and Z, and you've done A, B, and C, and like, you're not good enough. You're not the role model that men need. And so it's like we forget to, see the forest through the trees, and we only hold ourselves accountable to these little bits and pieces. And, I hear you doing that a little bit with yourself as well. Do you feel that?
Well, the cheesiest thing I've heard about social media over the years is the whole idea we compare our deepest, darkest, worst moments to everybody else's highlight reel, because that's all they release on social media. Sure. And so I think there's an element of that that'll feed into every bit of who we are now and how we consider who we used to be or who we have progressed into becoming. And so I think that's just an evolution that's I don't know. It'll wrap me up forever, I'm sure. And I'm glad I don't have to parent a boy. I get the process of being a young girl is something I don't know. And so I get to learn it as I parent it. And so I think that's a part of it that it takes weight off my shoulders in that way. I like wading into the lives of college men. I used to joke for years and years, for almost 10 years, I guess, I coached girls soccer for no reason other than, I don't know, my younger brother played competitive soccer. So that qualifies me. I don't know. But I never played a day of soccer in my life, but coached a girls soccer for years and years and years and years, and loved it. Was a wonderful experience. And by the end, I was coaching girls at like the 12-year-old, 13-year-old range, but I was also working full-time with fraternity men. And I was realizing, and this is not meant to be insulting in any way, shape, or form, the two groups of people I was working with, 12 and 13-year-old girls and 18, 19, 20-year-old men, were making very similar decisions about their life at the same time. Like, they were going through identity issues of the same type at the same time. And I could deal with the men at that age. I don't know if I could deal with the men and the decisions they were making when they were 13, but I was dealing okay with them at 18, 19, 20, 21 years old. And I still do to this day. Started working with college men in 1994 or 5, something like that. And so 25 years later, I still love the experience of sitting down with a chapter of men and just saying, what the heck is, like, what's your life? What is this? Like, unpack for me. I want to understand.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And there's so many depths that we can get into with masculinity and the fascinating realm therein. So yeah, I want to follow that up with just a little bit of a deeper question. So let's get into that. Oh, not these two again over here. Okay, all right, break it up, you two. Enough of this here now. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. You're not spoiling now, are you? All right. Apparently we got a little too deep there for somebody, Whitby. Yeah, I don't know. The producers came in and shut that conversation down. Let's lighten it up for just a second, Whitby.
Cool.
Let's do a segment that I like to call things that you didn't know you needed to know about me, but now we're grateful that you did. We're working on the title, but so far I think it hits.
I'm gonna workshop that out a little bit.
Yeah. Maybe in future episodes if I remember before 5 minutes before the show. So
deep in prep.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Big in prep over here. So Whitby, I'm curious if there is, what is something that you think people need to know about you that they didn't know they needed to know?
So need to know is a really dangerous way to put that, because there's very little that people actually need to know, but on the, you likely wouldn't know. I'll start with this one. This is you probably wouldn't guess it, but when I finish it, you'll say, yeah, it sounds about right. Okay. So I've actually come in third place in a highly competitive CrossFit competition here citywide in Charlotte. And so I have CrossFit for a couple of years, and I can give you the juice later on it. But if you've never heard of it before, I can talk to you about that. Maybe veganism, something like that. Things that no one would ever talk about. But
that's the number one rule of CrossFit, is to talk about CrossFit.
Yeah, pretty much so. So I came in third place at a CrossFit competition at one point. But the thing that will always be remembered is, as my name is being called as third place in, of course, the Masters division of CrossFit competition that they were doing, I majestically run up towards the podiums that they have and attempt to jump onto the third place podium and proceed to trip over it, to the point where the crowd that is clapping all of a sudden goes to the 100 people in one room all going, oh, because I have literally wasted every ounce of dopamine in my body. I have exhausted every ounce of energy that I have to the point that I can't get on the podium. So that was my introduction, and also close to my ending of CrossFit competing. So.
Wow. I did not know that. I know that you won. I remember liking that post because I'm a good friend. And that's how I show deep compassion for people who do monumental things. But that's incredible. In front of a room filled with box jumpers.
Yes. I could not jump onto a box.
The last box.
Not even one at the end.
I love that. That's a fun story. All right, here we go. My turn. Growing up, I had an obsession with stuffed animals. Like, I had a full-blown menagerie. None of them were glass. Sorry, Tennessee Williams. No, they were all stuffed. And my favorite one was a koala named Mimi. And Mimi went everywhere with me. My mom probably sewed up Mimi at least 47 times. Mimi is actually currently buried in the front yard. We made a gravestone for Mimi as well. Put Mimi in a shoebox. So yeah, rest in peace to Mimi. The best named stuffed animal I had was a walrus named Schmedley.
Nice.
It didn't even have a monocle, but his name was Schmedley.
It deserved a monocle.
It deserved a monocle. Anyway, that's a random fact about me. What else you got for us, Whitby?
Well, let me just tag on to that one for a second, totally unintended. I did not have a, let's say, rich collection of stuffed animals as a child. Mm-hmm. I narrowed in and had a Snoopy collection. Yeah. And there's my dad with Ask Him About the Imposter Snoopy. So I had a collection of Snoopies, which included an original Snoopy that was like an original 1970s Snoopy doll that I had sort of loved so well that it was flat. There was other ones. There was backup Snoopies. There was large Snoopies and small Snoopies. There was Spike, who was Snoopy's cousin, if you remember, who was from the Southwest and had little whiskery kind of things.
I do remember that. That's a throwback.
And so there was all of those, but at one point, I think it was in college, I came home from college, and there is this Snoopy waiting on my bed, and it looks sort of like the original Snoopy, but it is not.
Oh, no.
The original Snoopy, because the original Snoopy had an arm missing that my mom had sewn, and I knew where it was sewn, and she may have actually attempted to cover and re-sewn something or whatever to make it appear to be the right Snoopy, but it is not the right Snoopy. This is an imposter Snoopy, and it is still an article of contention in my larger family as to whether or not that is an imposter Snoopy or the real Snoopy. Which,
wow,
real story, imposter Snoopy.
There we go. There we go.
Not a fact that I had anticipated sharing in any way, shape, or form. But you talk about stuffed animals, you got to go imposter Snoopy.
I love it. I love it. We have a few people who are chiming in here about their own stuffed animal stories. Scott had a brown, it looked like a brown Snoopy named Henry, even had an official name tag. That's exciting. And more people like your shirt, Steve Whitby, so that's really great.
Nice.
This shirt is really doing it for you, whether you've worn it every day of your life or not. So here's the last fact that I'll share, and then we'll jump back in. My parents would not let me get any sort of pet when I was younger, as far as like the quintessential, no dogs, no cats. And my dad was allergic to cats, so that was totally fine. I didn't even really love cats. And so no offense to the cat people out there. I mean, maybe a little offense, but anyway. But we could never get a dog and whatnot. So there were other pets that I was allowed to have. And the one that I'll tell you about today, saving other stories for later days, is that at one point I had 2 anoles. And anoles are lizards that you can pull their tail and it can come off and they can still live, and you have to feed them crickets. And now I got these 2 anoles just because I wanted to have a pet, and I immediately regretted it. If my parents are watching right now or listening, this is the first time they're hearing this, but I hated those damn things, but I had to make it believe like I loved them because I needed to show them that I was a competent pet owner. Mind you, they got out routinely, and if they didn't get out, the crickets sure as hell did. And it was a true disaster. Those 2, rest in peace, and I am sorry for not being the dad that you needed. There we go, folks. That segment's called Things You Wanted to Know About Us, or Things You Now Know About Us that you didn't know you needed to know about us. Whitby, let's jump back in. Let's jump back in and talk about this. You recently went through a gigantic life transition. You had to make a huge pivot. You worked in a faith community in Charlotte, North Carolina for a number of years. I'll let you kind of tell the backstory there. But things kind of came to a head and decisions had to be made. And one of those decisions was to move your position under somebody else or kind of give it to someone else and whatnot. And in that moment, again, you'll fill in the gaps for me here. But in that moment, you had to go from, I know exactly what I'm doing. I love what I'm doing. I love how I am serving the community. And because you were able to play in the band and you're so musically talented, as we see the guitars behind you. To like, oh, shoot, I'm in my mid 40s. What the hell does someone do now? What happens? Can you tell us a little bit, fill in those details that I messed up or missed, but then also talk a little bit about what did it feel like to have to make a complete switch?
Oh, that's, so, Ira Glass that hosts, This American Life. Mm-hmm. I have a friend who always wanted to be Ira Glass, and she got the chance to meet Ira Glass. And the question that she had, like everyone's asking him the very, the stupid questions that people ask Ira Glass, so what's your favorite story, or, those kind of things or whatever. And her question was so good. It was, how do you actually get people to tell you these things? Because there ain't no way in the world I would tell you the things that people tell you that you then put on the radio for millions of people to listen to. Yeah. And his answer was so rich. He said, I need to catch people in the middle, because if they finished figuring out that story, they can't tell it well anymore. You have to get them while they're still living some part of it. So it could have happened 50 years ago, but they can't be done processing it, figuring out, living it through to some degree. And so I try to embrace that as much as I can. but I realize that I'm still in the midst of that transition to some degree. And so therefore I don't have 100% perspective on how to tell it well yet, because it has been a rich and beautiful year. But as you said, I worked for a church, a non-traditional church here in Charlotte for almost 15 years, for 14 years, I guess. I worked at a place that I absolutely loved and still love. It's a wonderful community. The people that I met through that still remain some wonderful friends. My musical companions that I met through it, that I've recorded albums with, are some of the richest relationships that I will ever know in my life. I got to marry people as a part of it, including yourself. I got to make music and lead people and create teams and serve as a ringleader to people's creativity. I was our creative director, our pastor of creativity for a long time. And my job was to sort of whip people up with just some sort of spur in their shoe that annoyed them enough that they had to do something. And then they would do everything. I didn't have to do it. I just annoy them enough that they wanted to create. And it's an opportunity I'll probably never have again, but I will cherish those 14 years. But last year, as transitions happen, we had a ton of staff changes that had happened, community changes, and the role that I had just didn't make sense to be a full-time staff role anymore. I was among the oldest that was there, and it made a lot of sense for the role to transition to being served by volunteers instead of full-time staff member who was 47 years old or whatever I was at the time. And so last May, I had to make that transition in a very short amount of time from the place that I worship, that I know people, that I literally met my wife at a band practice at that church. Without that, I don't know who I would be. But going from that being a core part of my identity to having to embrace other parts of my life as identity orienting. And figuring out which parts of those are things I can carry with me, which parts of those I have to learn new, what skills are translatable and which skills get left behind, those kind of things. And so it's been challenging for dang sure for a family to go through a total upheaval when you're in your late 40s. But I mean, I wouldn't trade it in the world. I'm in a completely different profession now. I still love the college work that I do, but I love I'm a creative strategist with a digital company here in Charlotte. And it gives me the chance to do so many really interesting, intensely nerdy things that I like to do, and still be creative about it. But in such a different environment that I don't have to compare the two. I was worried for a long time that I would always compare what I do next with what I did last. And it is so completely different that I find that I don't need to, and that is liberating and beautiful. But I've been able to maintain relationships like with yourself that are made outside of that, or some of the relationships through my times at the church that have come with me, that they just change a little bit, or you learn things about them or whatever. I think that learning process is what is truly fun in it. And it's helped Tammy and me to take a look at what's important for our family, what's important for our marriage. Yeah.
I think that's so powerful, Whitby, because the fact that you were able to make the pivot, and now, we could sit here and right now it sounds like it was pretty smooth, right? But you and I had some powerful conversations in the middle of it, especially very early on of like this. It truly was your identity, right? You introduced yourself with that first. And so that's really, it was truly heart-wrenching for you, I know. And it just because you loved what you were doing. It's not like you got fired from a job that you hated, right?
No.
No. So, but I wonder, and you may not be at this place yet, and so that's totally fine. Feel free to push back. But was it the disruption that your life needed? at the time. Like sometimes these big disruptions are huge gifts. And I don't know if you're quite there yet and seeing it that way. And maybe you will never get there either. Let me not write your story that hasn't happened yet. But still, I'm wondering, so often these big disruptions, like take what we're in right now. This is a major disruption to everyone's life. And there's ways to look at it in a really negative way. And just be like, I miss this, I miss that, I miss that. It's okay to miss things. I'm not telling people not to do that. But at some point in time, you make the decision to stop missing and to start seeing what is now possible. How was that process? How was that process for you in this big transition?
So I promise this is going somewhere.
Rango.
Rango. No, I nerd out on all kinds of war stories. And I'll drop a World War II story on you any day, and I'll make you love tanks and trenches and all this kind of thing. And there's reason and meaning to it. One of the most random facts that I love knowing and not telling, because I think this might be the first time that I've said it out loud actually, is if you go to the beaches of Normandy right now, approximately 5% of the grains of sand or the grains of whatever's on the beach in Normandy is shrapnel. That means 1 in 20 pieces of something that you pick up in your hand is a piece of metal that was intended to kill somebody. But the beaches of Normandy are beautiful now. They have this really amazing grainy color to them that didn't exist before that shrapnel. I'm sure they were beautiful before, but it didn't look the same before the Normandy invasion that laid all of this horrific metal in the sand that is degraded to these tiny itsy bitsy pieces. That 1 in 20 pieces is that like symbol of death, but it's a part built into that beach now. I feel like there are really hard moments that happened in the course of the last year and even the year leading up to my leaving my last job. But they are not things that I regret, not things that I would trade. Yeah, I would love for it to be easier to do some of those things. And I'm not going to be cheesy and like every bad experience is a good thing in the future. Because no, some bad experiences are terrible crap that should never happen. They don't make you a better person. You don't wish them on anybody. Many of you know there are terrible things that can happen to people. This was not in that category. That was not even remotely in that category. But there are really dark parts of it that will always be in that handful that I pull up and look at. It's always going to be there. Whether it's beautiful or not, it's always going to be in that handful of sand or junk or whatever that I pick up off the beach. And it'll get more beautiful over time, I hope. But I'm not going to trade it out in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question, but
we just got Whitbeat is what just happened. If y'all that moment where someone tells a story that when they're done, you just sit there and look at them. Because there's nothing else to say, brother, first off, I'm really excited for that to be in a future speech. I've
not used that, but perhaps you'll be helping me build something around that. We'll see.
I got your back. But yeah, I think the way that you put that, articulated that was beautiful. I'm not even going to try to pick through it. I love that. I think to look at this experience in that way, and even knowing that, is the beach beautiful yet? Your new beach, quote unquote, right? Is it beautiful yet? I mean, beauty's in the eye of the beholder for sure, but you beholding it. So,
let's see what you did there.
but still, it's interesting to think about. I'll be fascinated. This would be an interesting point to come back to, like in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. How do you define this moment, right? When we look at the timeline of our life, we can't put not every single thing gets a dash, but moments like these crucible moments, they're the ones that we come back to.
Yeah.
Because that's where the pivot happened. And so I appreciate you sharing a little bit of what you went through in that time. Here's the last thing that I want to touch base with you about, Whitby. is that you have the opportunity as someone who worked at a church and worked at a church to have a lot of conversations with individuals about religion. And working with believers, non-believers, doing a lot of stuff with youth, and whatnot. And I love the way that you approach religion. I personally, as you know, I'm not a super religious individual. I hold nothing against it, as long as it's using its powers for good and not for evil. But I think that the way that you have conversations around it is really beautiful. Where did some of that? Where did your capacity to teach what you love to a world that isn't always looking for something new, a new big belief system, even one that is as historically flawed as many religions are?
Sure.
So, how did that happen for you? Where did you find your love in finding that as a vessel to teach, or your vessel to teach it?
Well, I mean, I am sure in a different way, but similarly to what you just said, I'm not actually inherently a religious person either. Like, I don't actually like the religiosity of faith communities and churches and all that. So no matter what your faith construct is, the religion element typically gets in the way for me, like with the actual construction of it. The faith and the conversations that go with that's the rich part for me, because that to me is, not to be too cheesy or flippant about it, but that's the musical component of it. I love music. I mean, my wife was a music teacher, was a music major, is a musician, and is teaching my children to be musicians. Like, I love music. And so I think when approached in a gentle and beautiful way, the conversations that we have about faith and what we believe need to be musical. They need to be lyrical. They need to, when you are in an ensemble, you need to allow other people to play. You need to allow for each instrument and voice to have its own role, whether that is in alignment completely with you or not. I get supremely frustrated when people don't believe that having a faith structure around you is valid. I will be as unwoke as you can possibly be in the world of, I don't think you've opened your brain if you think that people that have faith are judging in a terrible way just because of who they are. I think there's a richness to believing something, no matter what it is, that should be embraced and should be fostered. Because even if you don't wind up in the same place that I am, I want you to explore. I want you to listen. I want you to listen to the people around you. I want you to prod and to poke and to invest in and attempt to create music with the people that you are sitting next to. We've talked before about the concept of sort of the late night living room leader kind of thing. Of, it's super rare that the president of anything is actually in control, which we know to such an incredible degree right now. But it is most
no comment.
It is most frequently the person that you have invested in, or that is invested in you, to the point that you allow them to sit next to you in a living room and lead you that way. And I think that so much of faith and conversations comes in those moments. Yeah. One of basically the man that hired me to work for the church, wonderful, intelligent, brilliant man. I remember one of the first things that he taught me was, if you want to love someone, you need to see them first. I think that can be bastardized in a really good way, that if you want to lead someone, you need to see them first. Because I think leading only comes from loving to some degree, because loving is not always a touchy-feely, smoochy, lovey thing. Loving is sometimes ugly and dirty and nasty. And so is leading. And so I think the faith conversation comes from that. Do you see people? Do you feel seen? And so, I mean, that's where I live on it. I will dig in deep with anybody when it comes to their faith, not in a way to, I'm not here to to convince you. I'm here to listen, because I'm amazed and I'm fascinated by the richness of all different ways of approaching it.
Yeah. But here's the thing, and I love the way you just put that. I mean, what a stunning analogy of teaching it through ensemble, where it's not, the flute doesn't have the lead the entire time, right? It's not all saxophone. Sorry,
Right.
Barry. But did you get that one? Did you get that Barry sax? Anyway,
Yeah.
so cheers. As he raises his Guinness.
Yeah.
So I love that concept. Why do you think people are so afraid to talk about religion? Is it because of the approach? Like, most people's approach is just so poorly, where like you mentioned there, they're not invested in the human, they're invested in the conversion or in the convincing,
Sure.
more than other things. I think in both ways, right? And for non-believers, having conversations about, here's why I'm a non-believer. Like, it's just one of those conversations that don't bring up politics, religion, or any of those things. But it's such a beautiful way to get to know the way someone's brain works. It's a really beautiful conversation if you have the right conductor and instruments that are excited to hear each other.
Well, I think you just listed it right there. I mean, there's not a lot more to add to it than you just said. I mean, it's about listening. Most people don't listen to understand. They don't listen to enjoy. They listen to respond. And conversations about deep soul stuff never works in that environment. It just will never thrive in a situation where the person sitting across the room from you is listening so they can respond to you. If they're listening to understand you, if they're listening to love you, if they're listening to enjoy you, really deep, rich stuff can happen. And way too frequently, if there is anything that's disagreeable, whether it's politics or faith or whatever it is, we spend our time attempting to respond or inject our perspective instead of listen to hear someone's perspective. So I don't shy away from saying what I believe and what I love and who I think loves me and that kind of thing. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to shove it down your throat. But I do hope that at some point we can listen to each other on what you believe and love in that same way.
Yeah. Yeah, that was beautifully put. That was really beautifully put. A good buddy of mine, his name's Chad Littlefield. He takes it one step further. He says, listen with the intent. Are you listening with the intent to hear what they're saying, or are you listening with the intent to win? And so often in religious conversations, political conversations, it's about the win. It's not about the understanding. And there's such a power to creating a pause where people just actually let me just take a minute. One of the best conversations, or one of the best things that was asked of me before a retreat that I went on, and it's something that I ask a lot of individuals as they're stepping into something that is a difficult conversation, a tough time with a loved one, a hard conversation with a child, or if they're stepping into a conversation where it's like, hey, even people who come to my Living Imperfectly live retreats, one of the questions that I ask them before they come is, how are you showing up today? How are you showing up? And recognizing, am I showing up with my walls up? Am I showing up with my spikes out? Am I showing up with my arguments locked and loaded here? Or am I showing up with just a genuine curiosity? Justin talked a lot about that, and enabled him to be a little more forgiveness with meeting his father in Ghana, and just that power of showing up with the intent to hear. And
not to do exactly what we're talking about not doing, but there's this movement right now, and let me trample on one of the things that you love most in the world, and that's improv comedy. We live in a no-but world, and improv comedy teaches the concept of yes and. How do you accept what's say yes and move on to something else? I think there's great value in the no response whatsoever, unless it's perhaps to say, unpack that for me. Yeah. I actually just want to hear more of what you said. I want to contribute nothing to it. I just want to hear more and deeper of what you just said.
Yeah.
I feel like I've been taught recently that the highest and best is to say yes and, where it's not always to say yes and. Sometimes it's just to sit quiet. Particularly when you start to get the fact that you might not actually understand what the other person is saying. Blow your mind. You might not actually know everything about them. You have the opportunity to ask them to unpack it, to tell you more, or just to sit for a second. Don't say no, don't say but, don't say yes and, just sit.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do it enough.
Yeah. I mean, so many of us are flat out afraid of silence also, right? So it's a fear of silence and also a fear of being seen as less than,
Sure.
or whatnot. And those two powers combined form hasty conversations that lead to defensiveness and unproductivity. And a lack of connection. And I love the way you put it. You're right. I am an improv nerd, and improv, yes and works great. And that's a rule. There's plenty of places where yes and it can be really powerful when we're thinking about innovation, creativity, when we're thinking about all those things.
Beautiful.
It's a place, right? But every concept has its place. It's not just some general like swath of like use it everywhere. It's not Windex from My Big Fat Greek Wedding. There's a
nice
hole
deep vault right there.
That's
deep vault.
Deep cut right there. Deep cut.
Totally.
Whitby, I am so excited that we got to spend this time together. I cannot thank you enough. I agree with this. Quiet reflection is a lost art. So I can't thank you enough for joining the show and being a part of Diner Talks, brother. It's been so special.
So much fun.
To hang with you and hear some stories and just get inside your brain for a little while, man. I love the way you think. I respect you so much as a man and fellow human being. I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
It's a blast, man. Thank you so much for letting me be here and hate on myself for a little while.
Into it. Not into it. Well, hang on. Not into it. I love it. My friends, if you are listening to the podcast, make sure if you want to hear this Q&A coming up with Steve Whitby that you check out the YouTube channel. Go to my YouTube channel. Just type my name in on YouTube. It'll pop up and make sure that you tune in for this Q&A. But if you got to go right now, you take care. Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate you. All right, Whitby. So I'm curious for our listeners. We've had a whole bunch of cool things that popped in. I'm going to give the listeners some chance to chime in and to ask some questions. What are some things that are sticking out from them from this conversation? Let's start first by the man who made the most jokes, but then said the most poignant thing. And your dad said, "Is there any doubt as to why we are proud of our son?" You let that hit you, Whitby. I'm not even going to keep it up there. I'm not even going to let you respond to it because I just need you to take your own advice and let that hit you for a second instead of some witty retort. Jess Ekstrom also loves you, but truth be told, I paid her to write that.
I just want to see the Airstream someday. Jess
Ekstrom living in an Airstream. She'll be a guest on here one day, and she doesn't know that yet. She just learned. So a lot of love for you, Whitby. I'm curious if people have questions for him. It could be about the topics of religion. It could be about the topics of being a dad to daughters, masculinity, also making a pivot in your life. And has there been a time where you've been forced to make a pivot and you just have some questions? We'd love to hear those for sure, just so we can give y'all what you want. Tim has been to Normandy. Normandy is really high on my list. Tina really wants to go to Paris, and I completely understand why. I know there's a lot of people where Paris is their favorite city in the world, and my stipulation is I will go to Paris, which I'm excited to see if we can make a trip to Normandy and do at least a few days up there. When did you get to go up there, dude?
I've actually never been to the beaches of Normandy. I really wish that I had physically been there. I will make it there someday.
Yeah.
I will say that one of the favorite trips that I've ever made was to, I was visiting London with a couple of friends about 15, almost 20 years ago, and got to take a side trip up to northern England, in Yorkshire, right on the northeast coast, right below Scotland, is an old mining town, a whaling town actually, called Whitby, which theoretically is where my name is from. And there's nothing like going to a town that shares your last name, because nobody there is named Whitby, because you don't get named Whitby until you leave that town. And then you're, John from Whitby or whatever. So I got to go, and the people I stayed with, they thought I was joking that my name was Whitby, but no, it was for real. But the richness of that visit did not come until, almost 20 years later. Just in this past year, we figured out in my family, in my marriage with my wife, we were looking at sort of some genealogy stuff and all this kind of thing. And the prime characteristic of the town of Whitby is Bram Stoker set part of the book Dracula there because of Whitby Abbey, which is up on this promontory that looks over the North Sea. And this abbey has been burned out like 10 times through its existence. It is gorgeous. It is Gothic and beautiful and burned out ruins. But we found out about a year ago that the most sort of primal and destructive burning down of the Whitby Abbey and the sacking of the city of Whitby was done by the Skates people, which were a Norse sort of like northern people, which is my wife's family. Is the Skates family. That is her. Fired. Yeah, it's on her dad's side of the family is the Skates name. And so, centuries and generations later, we have united the families again. And, the other night I was up late and I realized she was downstairs. I could only say plotting. I don't know. Maybe, I'm not sure. But if my house ever burns down, you know why.
This has been the greatest long play in history.
Sorry.
I'm saying, like, your wife is this is a long play for her.
It is. We're talking 1,200 years of building to this marriage.
Yeah, that's it. The future Shakespeares will write about this.
Dang.
That's incredible. Well, staying on the United Kingdom, their neighbor, Ireland. It's a quick question from Graham. Why has it been so long since you've shared a Guinness besides quarantine?
Oh, goodness gracious. I would love to share a Guinness with Graham. Graham lived in my chapter house with me for a while in college. He is an incredible man. He is a craftsman to the degree that you don't understand that craft exists in the world. If I remember correctly, a significant part of his art thesis graduating from college was he built a knife and actually took a block of metal, pounded it out into a wire that then he individually turned into links that turned into a chain that was the handle of this knife. So it's not a destructive piece at all. It is truly a piece of art that is created through these absolutely teeny tiny minute actions. And I still remember absolutely looking at the chains on that. He now teaches up in New York, teaches arts and crafts in like not a knitting way, but like craft art in a deep and an incredible way. And so I would love. So Graham, calling on down to Charlotte. It's not nicer down here than up where you are. So let's share a beer.
There it is. Your dad asked a really quick question.
Who
poured the second Guinness? Because I also didn't see where that second beer came from.
It's a talent. You just develop it through time.
The Beagle?
The Beagle. No, I did it myself. I just happened to manage while we were talking.
That was very impressive.
Multitasking.
We got some cool questions coming in here. Let's touch base. Dan Fail asked you a question. Dan Fail in the house. Jump for joy. What do y'all feel is the most important part of telling a story that punches you right in the gut?
I'm interested in your answer to that question, James.
Sure. I think for me, it's about a roller coaster. right? The more I can get you laughing, then the harder that gut punch is going to hit you at the end, right? Like it's like a true sucker punch. Because if I get you laughing, then I drop your walls. I make you feel more comfortable. And so that's a big thing. And so, since humor is such an important part of what I do, that involves inserting specifics. So in other words, you're not driving the car, you're driving a Subaru. Right? You didn't open the door, you opened the screen door. You opened the third drawer from the bottom. Like those little, you can't get crazy into the details, but those little things that scene paint are ways that bring your audience into the exact room where you were, where the story took place. And so all of those things, they force you to wrap an audience member to wrap themselves up in your story. And so I think that's a huge motorcycle goes by. I think that is one of the biggest things for me. And then obviously the tone that you use when you tell it as well. I mean, you are the conductor and the orchestra at the same time when you tell the story.
I think providing the detail that allows you to tell it quietly, I think is what gets it for me. If you have to if I have to raise my voice to get someone's attention in the middle of a story, I have failed. I need to be able to tell it with a level of emotive detail where you can see people in the actual equation, that I can do it exceedingly quietly. There could be 1,000 people in an auditorium, or it could be 4 people sitting around a dinner table. If you can't tell it quietly, you're not telling it well, in my opinion. Or I'll turn that around. If I'm not telling it quietly, or if I can't tell it quietly, I probably can't tell it well enough yet. And I need to find the place where I can tell it quietly. On the craft side of things, one of the most important parts, Dan, that I will give you on telling a story well that allows for things to hit you to that depth, something that I've learned that was not the case in 1999 when I was talking with students or talking with professionals. If I'm working in a business environment or I'm working with a bunch of 19-year-olds. I'm going to give you a icky, dirty, ugly secret. I do not lie in my stories. I will not lie to you, but I will change one detail. I will change one thing that makes it ungoogleable. Because otherwise you have students, or this happened, I was working with essentially like a business roundtable kind of thing. And I saw someone in the back of the room, and I knew they were Googling the story I was telling. They wanted to know essentially the punchline before I got there. They want to know where I was going, because I can do the slow burn. I can do you 22 minutes on one story. I can do it, and I will, and I love it. And if you get to the point at 16 minutes when I've got 6 more minutes to go, we failed. So I try to make all my stories to some teeny tiny degree ungoogleable. It doesn't change anything about it. I might, if I say it happened in 1932, maybe it happened in 1931. But you're going to put 1932 in Google, and it's not going to work. And so nothing big, but so that's on the backstage craft side. Wow. I'm a little embarrassed now that I've said it out loud, but I do it. I admit that I do it.
Secrets here.
Sorry. I now feel a little icky.
You should not. You should not.
None of it changes the substance in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. Whitby, I'm wondering if I asked the audience for you to tell a story, would you, if I had them vote on what story you could tell? Would you be willing to tell a story?
I would always be willing to tell a story. Always willing to tell a story, but you tell me if there's something that needs to be told. I think we got a few stories that I want a few stories where I want the audience to pick. And you tell me if any of these are inappropriate or way too long, right? Like we're trying to. So first off, we got the tanks and trenches in World War II. Mm-hmm. We got the story of the archer, the Olympic archer. Mm-hmm. Do you shaving a yak? There's yak shaving for sure.
Yak shaving, okay. And then what would be another one? The bridge.
There's the bridge.
The bridge in what country was the bridge in?
Well, you can I'll tell you if we tell that story.
Okay, well, there you go. Wow, okay. So here's what I want to know. If you want to hear Whitby tell a story, I need you to vote in the chat right now which one of those you want to hear. You want to hear about tanks? You want to hear about yaks? Do you want to hear about a bridge, the bridge, or do you want to hear about an Olympic archer? Throw it in the chat right now. We're going to do that while you're voting. My man Jordan wrote in. Jordan lives in London, Ontario, which is where one of my favorite rappers of all time came from. And shout out to Shad. But Jordan is a good friend of mine, a fellow bearded brethren, so we like him, Whitby. But this is a really cool question that he asked. He said, biggest thing you wish someone told you prior to having children?
My wife's in the next room. I should go ask her. What I wish someone had told me before having children. So,
Dan Fail, vote on the stories that were given to you.
So if here's the thing. Here's something somebody did tell me immediately before. We're talking like a day before I had my first child. And so they almost didn't tell me. And so I'm going to put it in that category. I'm glad they did. I didn't understand it at the time. And now if anybody asks me for parenting advice, this is essentially the only thing I will tell them other than there's no advice that I can give you that will make this easier. A dear friend of our family, a man named Mark, I worked with him for a long time. He is gentle. He has wonderful children. He sat me down and he said, babies don't have volume controls. They have ons and offs. And so if they cry, they're either crying or they're not. Yeah, they're occasionally a quieter cry, but to them, they're either crying or they're not crying. There's not like varying degrees that they're going to work through. Basically, if they're unhappy, even at 1%, they're going to cry. Like they're either all the way happy or they're crying. And so therefore, not every time they cry, do you need to race across like 9 feet of minefields of Lego on the floor or whatever it is to get to them and immediately solve their problem. They might just need a couple of seconds to see if, oh no, that was just my arm was trapped under me. Maybe I'm okay now, or whatever it is. Like any discomfort at all puts them in the, oh my gosh, everything is wrong. And that's actually remained relatively true now that my children are 11, 12, and 13 years old. Mm-hmm. There's a degree, and I don't want to diminish their needs in any way, shape, or form, but there's a degree that sometimes, I hope they don't watch this tomorrow, but there's a degree that sometimes I really think that Tammy and I look at them and we're like, really? Really? That's what you're crying about? Wow. Yeah, I'm going to go finish cooking dinner because you just worked that out for yourself. Yeah. Like there's an element, you need to be patient to see if they're going to work this out on their own. Or figure out what they actually need from you instead of just assuming I got to solve this now. I'm going to solve 100% right now. And I fail at that all the time. I solve way too many of their problems for them. I don't want to be that parent in the long run. And I know I overdo it, but there's a degree that sometimes you just got to look at them and say, well, enjoy that cry.
Enjoy that cry. Yeah, for sure. I love that. I question my ability to be patient as a parent for that reason. Yeah. Scott went ahead and quoted you. So, all right, Whitby, the votes are in. Thank you for Jordan. Great question. Thank you for asking that. The votes are in. And because she is a history buff and because she is my sister-in-law that I love, we're going to go with this one also because it got the most votes. But Tanks is the clear winner with Bridge coming up next. So can you tell us the Tank story, Whitby? I know you don't love the dance, but alas, can you dance for us?
Well, so now I see that Dan Fail suggested sheets of paper and Lord of the Rings, and I'll tell you, it's a way better story. So Dan, you picked the right one, but oh gosh, someday we'll just have to dig down deep into how The Hobbit was written because that's what that story is about. But oh goodness gracious, well that needs to start with if you haven't read The Hobbit before, just go read The Hobbit. Then we can talk about the story another time. But hold on a second. Give me just a second.
Okay.
Lost my headphone there. This book right here is a transformative and wonderful book. It's called D-Day. It's written by my favorite author of all time, Stephen Ambrose. He writes historical. He writes nonfiction. He wrote the Citizen Soldier, which was the basis for Band of Brothers. He did the family histories and the narrative stories that created the Band of Brothers series. He did all the original research for that. He's an absolutely brilliant author. And so I read this book years ago. Probably 96, 97, 98, somewhere around, and absolutely loved it. It is a book that basically breaks down 1 or 2 days in our history over the course of 800 pages. And leaves so much more to be told. There's never a moment in the book that you're like, oh, he's overtelling this. Like, it's always, I need to know more about what you are telling me right here. And I could relate 1,000 stories from that book, but the one that I read 2 more books about, and then was still curious, had to do with tanks. And, I told you about the sand in Normandy and the amount of shrapnel that is still on those beaches. And, the book D-Day is about one day in June in 1944, where basically, to put it kindly, the Americans, the Canadians, and the British threw several 100,000 men at the beaches of Normandy in an attempt to liberate Western Europe, while the Russians in the eastern part of Europe were trying to march towards Berlin also. We were attempting to, in one last push, end what was the terror of World War II. And after we spent months planning D-Day, where we literally just threw men at the beach and hoped that some would make it to these massive cliffs, that they could climb these cliffs, they could dig into the pillboxes, the machine gun nests, the traps, the unbelievable terrors that were built by a line of Germans over the course of a couple of months. After that all happened, they had more to go. They successfully threw these men on the beach. They did what really almost no one thought they could, which was climb the cliffs and beat day 1, day 2, day 3, which is get men onto the top of the cliffs and get ready to march across northern France and liberate Europe from Hitler. And they had a moment of recollection, or a moment of pause, in that they thought they had this big job, which was one day. But when they got to the top of the cliffs, they had 850 miles to go to get to Berlin. They had gone essentially 600 yards, and they had 850 miles to go. And so they assembled these teams of men. There's tanks that they had landed on the beach. There was, small troop carriers. There were small arms. There was small groups of men assembled around these tanks that had to march through the French countryside. This was all farmland that they had to march and plow through to go these 850 miles to get to Berlin. And they had prepared. It's not like they didn't know. Like, they knew when they got to the top of the cliffs that they had to get to Berlin. So it wasn't a surprise that they had to go through this farmland. And the way they prepared was actually to take an entire section of southern Wales and an entire section of southern England and actually create sort of a reproduction of the French countryside. So the Americans, the Canadians, and the British, the forces, these 18, 19, 20-year-old men could actually practice marching across and learning what the battle techniques would be to liberate Northern Europe. And so the way that they built these replicas, they actually built towns like French towns. They built farms like French farms. And the way they had done that was by flying old planes across northern France and taking aerial photos straight down. And we know this is 75 years ago, so photography was in a totally different place than it is now. You couldn't take rich Google Earth images that are 3D and examine all elements of things. You basically got a picture that looked a little bit like a topographical map to some degree, just a grainy black and white photo from a couple of thousand feet up that they translated into maps, and then they mapped those out in southern England for us to practice on. It was basically this patchwork. If you can picture squares of farmland separated by a patchwork of roads, this interconnected grid work that marked one man's farm from the next family's farm. And in the days of sort of natural farming, the way that the farms were separated from each other, at least in the European way, was by something called hedgerows. And hedgerows were these berms of earth that had foliage growing on the top of them. And it's basically to keep my sheep from running into your fields. And it was to keep my crops from growing into your road, something like that. And so we saw those when we took the pictures of France going across. We knew that there was this patchwork of fields. We knew that those fields were separated by hedgerows. And so we built replicas of that in England, and we practiced on them. And we exactly replicated what they looked like in England, which was an English hedgerow, is this small, gentle, rolling hill with some shrubs on the top of it to keep, once again, the sheep from jumping over, and that's about it. And we practiced and we got good. We even designed our tanks slightly differently so they could roll over top of those hedgerows and not waste time getting to the crossroads where we were sure the Germans would concentrate their fire and we would be shredded to pieces. And so when we got to the top of the cliffs and we assembled into teams and we started to roll into France to attack and to reclaim land, we came to the first set of farms and we realized we had made a grave error. It was referred to as the French farming error. And the error was not on the side of the French, the error was on the side of us. It was the assumption that we made that French hedgerows looked like English hedgerows, and they just don't. A French hedgerow at the time was now a 6 to 7 foot tall earthen mound with a small or very large tree growing out of the top of it in a row. It was a massive wall of earth and trees that separated these farms from each other. We expected them to be several feet high. These were measured 10, 20, 30 feet tall instead, with earth and with trees. The tanks that we had that we intended to run straight across these farmlands, the tanks were helpless against this. The only way for us to go across farm, the only way to make that happen was to actually use explosive charges, and to take 4 or 5 men, demolition experts, would have to actually dig holes in the bottom of these hedgerows, stick the explosives in, wait, clear everybody out, blow them up, and if it didn't work well enough, do it again, which would take a really long time, which is plenty of time for the forces that you're fighting to line up to prepare to shred us. So instead of doing that, we decided we had to take the roads. Instead of going across the farms, we decided we had to take the roads. So we drove down the road to the crossroad where the fire was already concentrated, and they shredded us. It was easy to find us. It was easy to focus on us. And that continued. And we slowed down and we nearly stopped. Because the assumption that we made was what we knew was what was right. We were put in a totally different situation. And it stayed that way until a welder, a man from St. Louis, he looked at the front of the tanks that they were driving. He would have to march next to this tank every day and essentially risk getting shredded in these crossroads. He looked at the front of the tank that couldn't go over these hedgerows and realized there had to be something we could do. And so one of the things that we had in excess was scrap. We had scrap because the Germans had built incredible defenses on the beaches of Normandy, and we had been able to disassemble them, to blow them up. But in the end, that scrap that was intended to keep us away became one of our greatest tools, because this welder from St. Louis realized that if he welded those pieces of scrap metal to the front of those tanks in sort of this strange angled way, he could actually create something that they sort of dubbed a rhino, that if driven exactly correctly at the right angle at those hedgerows would actually dig into the roots of those trees, dig into the bottom of those hedgerows and rip them up. Those same tanks that were defenseless, that when we tried to drive over the hedgerow would flip up like this, showing its delicate underbelly and be completely vulnerable, now became a beautiful and deadly fighting force, where we could take those rhino horns and drive into the bottom of those hedgerows and rip them to shreds. Now that welder, his name was Cullen, he didn't have permission to weld those to the front of that tank. He didn't run it up to Eisenhower back in England. He didn't even run it up to a colonel of any kind. He asked his lieutenant. He asked the guy that was barely in charge of this group of men that were absolutely panicked about the situation that they were in. He said, "This is our reality. This is our now. This is what has changed. This is our understanding. This is who we are. This is what we can do." And that welder, who knew only one thing, how to put metal on metal, make it stick, make it work. He took his St. Louis, he put it on the front of that tank, he ripped into those hedgerows, and spoiler alert, we made it to Berlin. I'm not going to say that a welder from St. Louis won the war for us, but a welder from St. Louis might just have won the war for us. So much blood went on those beaches just to get to the top of those cliffs, for us to realize that we had a long way to go. The best laid plans sometimes have moments in them that were just absolutely rely on the beauty of one person understanding what they have, what they know, doesn't need permission. It just needs honesty. It needs leaning into what you know and can do. He put those rhinos on. We won the war. There's a lot more to the story, James, but that right there at least is a little bit to give you what tanks and trenches can do. So,
y'all clap it out for Whitby. Show some love. Smash that heart button. Tell him you love him in the chat. Thank you so much for telling that story, brother. It gives me chills every time. And just the way that you compose it, the way that you build it, it is listening to you tell a story. Especially having the privilege of hearing you tell it a second or third time allows you to watch. I don't want to talk about it, but it's just really powerful. And it's really cool to be able to sit back and watch the art as well, as Dan Fail was talking about. So thank you, brother. Quick note for everybody, though. Before you tell a story, don't tell everybody that they could have heard a better story.
Sorry.
I love you, brother. No, you're totally. Here's the thing, man, is that I had no worries, right? Because I knew you were going to land the plane or the tank. So yeah, it's so good, man. It's so good. Thank you so much for coming on here. You got some people out here that love you. That's my choir teacher. Sarah loved the story. Whippy's here for it. Dan Fail's here for it. Scott Hendricks loved it. Graham, I hear you for sure. Indeed. And my brother's a history nerd, so I know he appreciated that as well. And I agree, Nicole, we will end on this. You are truly one of a kind, and we are grateful for you, brother. Thanks so much for spending the time and hanging out on Diner Talks with James. Y'all catch us again every Wednesday, 9 o'clock, Facebook Live and YouTube Live. We look forward to doing that for sure. And Finally, Tammy Whitby comes in and drops a little love. We love you, Tammy, and thank you for everything, for sure. My dad even liked it, too. Whitby, thanks so much, brother.
Thanks for the invitation. This is a lot of fun, James. It's so much fun to watch them.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, man. I really appreciate that. Thanks for believing in me, and y'all take care. Have a great night.